tools like Mathematica or MATLAB. You put in an expression like formulas, and then it spits out the derivative expression. But this expression usually is very, very long, and so if you don't take care, then the code can go, let's say, extremely to high lengths. And AD gives you, let's say, a runtime. So that's why AD is interesting. That's why I wanted you to know about it. And it's also used a lot in Newton type optimization algorithms. Maybe one thing that I think is like in every domain there is a highlight, right? And the highlight of AD, I would say, is what's called the cheap gradient result, right? That means that the gradient of a function, which might depend on a million inputs, you can get this gradient at only 4 times the cost of a function evaluation, right? Even though it might spit out a million numbers, namely all the partial derivatives with respect to all these inputs. And that's something that you can't reproduce with perturbing the function. So that's like the real power of algorithmic differentiation. It's really reflected in this result. So you take a function, you evaluate it once, you do a bit of massaging of your code, and then you can get all the derivative directions into all your input variables at the cost of 3 to 4 times the function evaluation, independent of how many inputs. So I think this is very important to remember, because very often people have very expensive function evaluations, and sometimes I mean, very often you see such slides. People do some type of search-based algorithm, and they say very expensive function to evaluate, and that's why I have to use genetic algorithms to optimize it. And I think this is like exactly wrong, because if you have a very expensive function, I think you should first think of how could I get cheaper than evaluating this function a million times. How could I get a gradient of that? If you can get this gradient out, it's such a useful knowledge. Maybe, okay, before, please think of your questions, but I will still tell you one mini anecdote. It's not about optimization. I was traveling last week, and I was in a foreign town, actually Magdeburg, and I was looking for a house number. And then you look at one house, right? And 36, but I was looking actually for, I don't know, 30 or something, right? So now the question is, in which direction should you go if you see 36, right? That's an interesting question. If you only see 36 and you don't have any gradient information, you have to go to another house, and that's what I did, right? I went to another house, and then there I thought, I saw actually, I think 35, right? Okay. And then I had to think, and then I thought, okay, this direction is the right one. The same thing happens when you are in a train, right? So you want to get into carriage 2, and then you see you're in front of carriage 5. Which direction should I go? You need to run to the next carriage, and then you know the finite difference. You know, by finite difference is the gradient, and then you know, oh, that was the wrong direction. You run in the other, and then you hopefully make it for your train, right? And in my hometown, and I think in many towns, there is my hometown Zemburg, there is a rule that if you have always the, I think, how was it? I think the uneven numbers you think are always on the left, something like this, right? So you see a number, and you see 35, and then you know, oh, it's on the left, and then it must be increasing in that direction, decreasing in that. So if you know this rule, like there's some hidden extra knowledge on the gradient, it is enough for me to sample one single house, and then I know the direction. In that sense, I just wanted to tell you, and it's a bit overblown, right? But imagine you're having a 2-dimensional street, right? In some cities you have these like blocks A, B, C, number 11, 2, 3. And if you know a rule about which direction, you don't have to run into 2 blocks away in order to know the gradient, but you can actually evaluate the block. I'm at A5, and then you know B15 is there, this direction, right? And then you can go into the right direction. So I just wanted to say, the more your entire dimensional spaces, the more cumbersome it is to evaluate your gradient by function evaluations, by running to the next house to see what house number I get. And if you can get a gradient for free in high dimensional space or very low cost, I think we should use it. And that's why people in machine learning use it, right? So that's backbone, right? optimizing a neural network with a million parameters by just random search and evaluating the fitness function and then doing predictive models. You can do it, but you will never be as efficient as these gradient-based methods. Yeah, so I just want to say, if you can get a cheap gradient, get the cheap gradient, and it's worth to think hard how to get it. You will never get it by function evaluations alone. You need to actually open the box, and some tools do it for you, but you need to know tools and so on. Algorithmic differentiation is, let's say, such a tool. PyTorch, TensorFlow, and so on also offered, and Casali is basically, you see it in the name. Computer algebra systems, system for algorithmic differentiation. The I is, I think, for differentiation. So AD is at the core of it. It was written around AD. Okay, sorry for this long story. It was also a bit directed at Hannes, of course, yeah. And one of our online participants who shares his picture with us. Grateful. And we are now 6 in the room. And now I open the floor to questions. Maybe we do it this way. Each of you might have prepared this question, so we first give one round and then the second round. So to avoid that, it's always the same. So each of you please ask exactly one question. I will write them down. Who wants to start? Yes, Rashmi? Sorry? Yes, page 64. Yes.
There be unnecessary condition that spectral radius of the matrix should be.
Yes, there's a spectral radius, right? Yes.
But in that case, we do not know the stand. Finally, it is to the stand.
So the question is about this kappa, the exact contraction rate of a Newton type iteration, right? Okay, so but maybe I wait for other questions, but I will answer it. Kappa exact equals the spectral radius of the number minus, and then we had this m. Right? That's the formula about. Other questions? Let's collect 6 questions first, and then I will answer.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yes, please.
It's about Newton type line search on page, one second, on page, I guess 69. Yeah.
Which one?
Page 69.
Yes.
Algorithm. And in this algorithm, we stop if our gradient is lower than a given tolerance.
Yes.
And so my question is, are we sure that there's no saddle point when we stop?
Okay, that's a very good question. I will collect first. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Rafael?
No, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just very interested on how can you get this derivative from 4 evaluations?
Of what?
4 the just mentioned.
Okay, so
on intuition from the reverse. Yeah.
I mean, it's in the lecture, but I will try to do it. Yeah. And why 4, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Other questions? You had one, so wait a minute, moment, yes, please.
Yes, maybe over time we use the web quantities.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get through how this takes us competition time.
So that's forward AD, right? Which yes. Page 77. Forward AD. Yeah, thank you for the question. We will answer them all. More questions, please? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that's not about the lecture. No. I mean, if you don't have a question, you could also say, I would like some extra explanation of this chapter or something, if you have, but maybe you can think about it. So, I think we still have 3 questions left. So let's say, or places I can see. Or maybe 2. Yeah, do you like to ask one?
This time I
don't worry. Okay, thank you.
Sometimes I get lost in the vision of the JFU.
Yeah.
Because you have the vector value that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the and maybe that's.
It's which page? Page. It's like page 76 or something, right? These very long tilde quantities, right? Yeah. Okay, I think then if there's no other question, or does some other question maybe from the chat or something, let me check. No, nothing in the chat. Okay, so then I would now answer the questions in a suitable order. I mean, some are on AD, right? Or these. I will answer them together, and then these are 2 independent questions, I would say. So, because it's simple, I would just actually go this. We don't have to. Yeah? So, the first question was about the exact contraction rate. And we had a formula that says if you have a Newton-type method, and you remember that was like this. For the full step method, in this context, and we just say, hey, I have my old method, and I take, okay, yeah. Sorry, I write X now, which could be also W, right? So sorry for the notation. Let's maybe call it W, right? In the selected W. I have some metrics that I can invert, and then right? And you see, this is a Newton type method. It would be exact Newton similar to J W -1, and then it would be the exact Newton type, right? And so now this whole thing generates a dynamic system, right? And this dynamic system, in some picture, I like this picture, let's say, right? This would be and this generates a dynamic system that in the best case will converge to a point, right? Let's say your derivative would be the wrong one, like this one, the wrong derivative, but still a useful one. It would iterate like this, right? And then try the function again. Use maybe another wrong derivative, maybe this constant, and then it would convert. And now the question is with which rate does it converge? And then you basically differentiate that map here, and that is this thing. That's the Jacobian of that map actually, because the F is getting this derivative, right? We derive that this is actually to differentiate that whole thing. It gives this at this point, right? So it's the derivative at that point. And yeah, I don't derive that again, but then we say this. So everything around this point is approximately by this linear map, and then we look at the contraction radius of that map, and that's the vector radius. And okay, now your question was actually very simple. It was, how do I know W star? And the answer is, I don't know. You don't know it in practice. It's only here for theoretical analysis. It's just that you know that if you would know the point at which you are converged, right, you could evaluate the derivative that you have here and then look at the contraction rate. And it's not useful for anything you could say, right? That would be something that you could say, but then I can say, no, it's actually good in mathematics to first define a quantity, right? In numerical mathematics above all, you would say this is the contraction rate, and then you can try to estimate that rate actually. And you can actually estimate it while you look at your iterates, and what we very often do, we call this kappas, we typically have the iterates. And you could, for example, look at WK, and it's one thing that you can do, right? You can, sorry, we usually do subtract actions from each other, and we look at the norm. That's something that we very much do in observations, right? So you just look at the steps, and then the steps is actually the step from one to the next step, right? And if you plot that over time, then hopefully it will shrink. At least at some point. It should shrink, right? Otherwise it wouldn't come. And so if you now plot this in the log, watch this. So then you have here the log of that. Right? That would be maximum product. So if I have this log plot, then it will make something like this. And then you can actually decide, let's take the last 3 points, put a line through them, and then estimate the slope of that. And that slope is then basically the contraction rate, actually e to the contraction rate. Right? So you could also say I fit an exponential decay to the last point, and then exponential decay goes to this number. So actually, what we very often do is we just take the last 2 points, first 2 points, and just, so we very often say, take the kappa at the estimate at iteration k, so you find that the WK minus WK minus 1 divided by WK minus 2 minus WK minus 2. Right? That is like the contraction that you should see, like one step is a bit smaller than the previous step by this factor. Yeah. And if you think of like the dominant eigenvalue of a linear system, at some point you think that the largest of all eigenvalues will dominate in any linear combination. So asymptotically, this would be a correct estimate because both these residuals would be in the same direction of the eigenvector, those eigenvectors. So in some sense, this makes sense, but when I would write a numerical paper, for example, we have typically estimates of this, like Florian writes papers where we use this, right? But if we have a constructed example, we can then compare that to our to the theory of our contraction rate that we get from whatever. So it's mostly like something we aim for. We know it exists, we know how to characterize it, but in practice you will never know it, but you will only estimate. Like the solution to a root vector. I mean, I can define the solution, and I do it by saying f of W star equals 0, right? I never know. It's like an implicit definition of something. Does it answer your question, or there's follow-up questions on that, right? Yeah, maybe the same. Min?
Can we also estimate the say quadratic or
yes. Let me say, so this whole question of how to estimate contraction rates, so Min asked if it should also be, that was your name, right? Yeah. If it's also possible to estimate, let's say, the quadratic contraction rate. And I should say yes and no. And the point is actually that if you really look at what happens here, even if you plot it into a logarithmic plot, I mean, quadratic means, if I'm not mistaken, so to say, it's not linear, but the slope is getting faster. But then, in this logarithmic case, at some point you have 10 to the minus 16. You know what happens when you have 10 to the minus 16? That's machine precision. So basically, at a certain point, when you're very accurate, things get only noise. So that's also what we have in this finite differences, right? If you perturb a little bit, then you get basically noises. And so what for all these things will happen, you can actually typically these processes, I mean, if you have a stable contraction, it will stay close to the true point. But what will happen is that it will just jump around in this neighborhood. And, yeah. So roughly speaking, if you look at perhaps something like this, and then you need to get the right moment. When you estimate it here, that's actually not in linear, right? So it's get just noise, right? So I like to say that quadratic convergence in practice is like the Higgs boson. Do you know the Higgs boson? That's something from physics. Did you ever hear about the Higgs boson? Do you know what's like one of the major properties of the Higgs boson? I mean, it was like, okay, in my time, it was since I'm a kid, actually, it was predicted that it exists. And then for, I think, 2 or 3 decades, people have experimentally searched for that. And let's say the problem of the Higgs boson is once you have detected it, like 1 femtosecond later, it's already away. Yeah, and that was the problem. And at some point, people say, now we have statistically proven that we have detected it. I mean, it's no one really can, I'm not no one. Very elaborate experimental physicists are sure now that the Higgs boson was detected. And I think very elaborate numerical analysts believe that quadratic convergence exists in practice, let's say, right? But it only exists in a very small hotspot, let's say. The problem is that before you reach, let's say, the quadratic region, right? You might have, I mean, the derivative is wrong. Actually, for big steps, it doesn't help you. At some point, you might not even have a linear way, right? So you might be more or less randomly done by some point. This sweet spot in between, you would need to really say, you look at the data and you say, let's take these 4 points or whatever and estimate quadratic convergence on that. And then you, so for quadratic convergence, you need, as you see, not only, I mean, it's actually it's very similar. You would take this one checking this things together, and then you have an omega. So that's it already. Yeah. But it's not that straightforward.
I have one question. Because of this K, that means that the rate is always changing every like this kappa.
The estimate is changing. That's the point, right? Yeah. It's just the currently best estimate that you have for this thing. And the problem with this estimate is that it's actually getting noisy if you continue doing it. So at some point you even have to throw it away. So it's not like averaging where usually things get better. It's really, I mean, many possibilities to estimate these things.
Why not inside the kappa? Because like it's just to prove that my system is converging somewhere.
So why do we need to go with the kappa or the omega or whatever? I mean, it's only to talk to other numerically oriented people, let's say. I mean, let's say if you control, it's very similar to control engineering, right? So if you have a controller designed, then you would say, hey, what is its decay rate? Yeah? How fast does it compensate a disturbance, right? And then you say, oh, it has a decay rate of something, right? So you would call it bandwidth in that context, right? So but that's nothing else than the contraction rate. It's like contracting things away, right? So if you tell a numerical analyst, oh, I have a wonderful algorithm, and it has a contraction rate of 0.99, then everyone will say, but that takes ages until you get right. It's not a good contraction rate, but if you say like 0.1, right, then it's like 1/10 every iteration, right? So 1 digit more of accuracy, you could say, actually, if you have 1/10, that's useful, right? It's more like getting a quality of that. So if I have, say, for example, in our papers, we would say, hey, we have something else, it has a certain structure. We propose to use that hashing approximation or whatever. So Gauss-Newtonism. right? So you propose a certain Hessian approximation, and then you prove what would be this kappa. And actually, in our lecture, we say, oh, the kappa is proportional to the size of the residuals, right? That's quite something, right? Because it means if you have a good fit, the kappa will be small. And that's already something that gives you intuition of when will the algorithm be good. So when you show to me, let's say something that we didn't talk about Gauss Newton, or did we talk about it already? It's like an unconstrained, yes, we did, right? I think unconstrained optimization. Or didn't we have that? Yeah, Newton type optimization. I think we had that. If you, let's say, someone shows you something like that, it says here are the simulation results, right? And this is the data, and that's the best fit I found, and then I say, that doesn't look like a very good fit, and don't think that your algorithm converged very fast. Is that true? And then people say, oh, no, it took ages. I needed to switch on globalization and mindset. And I said, maybe we should try this Gauss Newton or whatever, try another algorithm. Or you usually would say, make your model better. Something. I don't know. Okay, so with all questions around this topic of contraction rate estimation? Yeah, is it around that topic still?
Yes, yeah. More basic. So
yeah,
the eigenvalues of this matrix.
Yeah.
Is every step more or less giving the ratio we see here, right? Like the comparison to our first step, next step. We're talking about smaller than 1 year. I think we converging to the goal.
Yes, actually, one could define some. I mean, what is exactly the question is what is like the nonlinearity or linearity, or what the eigenvalues tell you.
Yes, actually, the question was that the eigenvalues tell me about the.
Yeah. So this is more something that is more familiar to systems theory people. Let's say I move actually to this file right here. So Hannes, you have to tell us, right, if it's not good or something. So, but if you have an iteration, this matrix here iteration matrix. And so if I have now an iteration which actually is basically around the origin, our iteration is like this, right? So you say that WK plus 1 minus W star, which is the solution which I don't know, right? But let's say this is up to first order, it's actually A times WK minus W star. That's so to say what the Taylor series says. That's the first order Taylor series. Okay, so this is the error, let's say, right? And if you call this, maybe I define this to be, let's say, VK plus 1, some vector, right? Or E, error, right? Error, that's the error. Then this is, then I have a relation like the error of EK plus 1 is equal to A times the error of EK. Asymptotically, my behavior. And now this A matrix, I mean, this A matrix is a discrete-time linear system, right? So I don't know if you are familiar with the real and imaginary, I mean, linear time systems, right? But the main boundary between stability and instability is the unit circle for that, right? So if you have eigenvalues of the A which are inside the unit circle, then it will contract. If there's only one out of the circle, then it will contract, right? And this rho is actually the largest circle that comprises all eigenvalues, right? So let's say this is how could we call that lambda, right? Let's call this eigenvalues lambda, and then you could find them, for example, stable negative one, there could be a stable positive one, there could be a pair of they come in pairs because it's a real matrix. They will all hopefully be in the unit circle and then it will contract it. And then the smallest circle that we can, let's say, draw around it, and this is so to say the circle in lambda bar is equal to rho, right? That's this circle. Lambda bar modulus. Okay. And now, okay, this is a very funny situation. Let's say that one of these eigenvalues, let's say this one here is not really the one that's dominating. That one is the binding one, and the others are being That's like the usual situation, right? Why should they all have a circle? And then this binding one, I mean, you can decompose whenever you have some error, you can decompose it in all the eigenvectors. And then you can start to apply the metrics many times. And then after a while, these other things, they will contract faster than this last, the biggest eigenvector. And so after a while, this E will be, so to say, all these E, they will be similar to lambda max to the power of k times E0, but they are only the component in the let's say eigenvector max direction, which I could express like this. I think I could like make it like this: E transpose V max. That's a scalar now, and the max. Right, so V max is a vector, lambda max is the corresponding eigenvalue, and then this is like the component, and this is like the V max, and this would be the error and 0. And I just project it here, and that's actually the only surviving part, and all the other components, they will be damped faster. And that's why I have this approximate. So in that sense, after a while, I expect that these errors will be oriented in the dimension of the largest eigenvalue. And then this formula makes sense, because then these two errors actually, if you subtract that, then will still be in the same dimension. So all these things are all in the same dimension. Yeah. But that's actually, maybe I should say this for the count. Right? So it's kappa estimation. For omega estimation, you can use the formula, but it's much more to count this linear. This is really
So when we consider just each dimension separately to
each eigenvector separately. Yeah, let's say, I mean, it's like, okay, sorry, it's about the practical estimation, right? That's where you would regard them separately, but then if you want to analyze the whole convergence, then you know that asymptotically, I mean, exactly, all the other, I mean, you can decompose every vector into the eigenvectors, right? And then you can iterate with this matrix. And you know that even if there's some transition phase at the beginning, after some time, the dominant eigenvalue will be the only remaining component. From that moment on, you get contraction.
We might have entries in this matrix A, which might have which are not the diagonal, but they're just going to be manifold.
Exactly. So many matrices have actually, you know, in linear systems you can have first transition phase. You don't even have contraction, right? But of course, I mean, when you end, typically, I mean, asymptotic contraction rate. Anyway, only at the end of a long process. You're very close to it. As I said, I mean, linear one is difficult enough to estimate. Like quadratic is nearly impossible to really rely on this. Because it's, as I said, like this. Right? Once you have quadratic convergence, you're basically ready, and then you kind of. And the same line, I cited it already, is that if you have a contracting well-working business method, you never need more rule of thumb, which you could easily, yeah. But that's also not, roughly speaking, I mean, if you have observed contraction by half, with the number of sides of 1, right, then you get 1/2 after 1 iteration. What is it? Very quickly, yeah, because it's so fast. While for linear convergence, if you have 1/2, it's something that you say this contraction. It's really contracting, and after you get a quarter, it will still take a while and have time to estimate. Quadratic is okay. That's why people like quadratic. So now I would say there's nothing more than this explanation. Answer? Yeah. Good. Then I moved. I hope you don't get dizzy here. We have more people in the meantime. And we go to the second question, which is, so that's your question, that's right? So how, if we stop when the gradient is small, right? Couldn't we be in a saddle point? Yeah. And the truth is, yes. That's the problem, that's it. You never know actually if you're, I mean, if you only have first derivatives, you cannot exclude that you're in a saddle, right? So you can try to do other things like compute the second derivatives, and if you see in the second derivatives a negative curvature at this point, then you say, well, I should not stop here, definitely not, right? But as long as you don't compute second derivatives, you cannot be sure. So why do people still use this criteria? I mean, let me just say what it means in practice. Okay, so of course, I mean, in theory, you can stop there in some algorithms, and sometimes they stop at saddle points, so I cannot exclude this. But it's unlikely. And the point is that saddle points are not attractive. I mean, think of this thing, right? So here we have actually an attractive attractivity for an optimization algorithm. So maybe we can even try to prove what happens for a saddle point. I think I can try to do the same language here, right? So no, I'm a bit funny now, but let me try to explain what happens if you, let's say you have something, let's say where f(w) x star is 0, but the second derivative of this thing is indefinite. Yeah? And I call it b star, b. Okay? Hannes, can you see this and can you hear my voice? Perfect, yeah. So, and now I could devise a method which is, let's say, very conservative. It's like I use a steepest descent method. I use something, no, this fashion, but I use an iteration which would say xk plus 1 equals xk minus b, and I have a constant b with a minus 1, and then another f of x. So this is what I could use, and I could use actually b, which is bigger in all in the positive metric sense than this, right? So I could make, for example, a diagonal matrix with a very large number, right? That is basically assuming a very high hashing, which means that the inverse is very small, which would correspond to very small steps, which is a bit like that. It's, of course, a globalized method would be even a bit different, but that's too difficult to analyze in a second. But now I want to look at what will be this matrix A. This matrix A will be this unit matrix of this, right? And then after the things, you will get this, and then times the action like this, right? So this would be now, so that would be now our iteration matrix. Yeah? And now comes the point. So this is a positive semi-definite matrix. Sorry, I should not say. And B is also positive definite, right? So no other, I mean, you would always choose a positive definite. I mean, the simplest would be like E is 1 over alpha, and alpha is a step size from that would be very small alpha. Okay, but what happens here? I have a unit matrix, I have a minus sign, and I have something which has only positive eigenvalues and negative eigenvalues. Okay, now I would need some extra math. I don't have available at the moment, but I could give it to you, but it's not in the manuscript, but it's something that realized. Oh, maybe I will not. Actually, I think I try to do something. I mean, one can actually show that rho B. I mean, let me formulate an inequality. So basically, For symmetric matrices, where the B is positive definite, which we usually have in optimization, one can show that spectral radius is the smallest. This is smallest row that satisfies it. That's already giving all the answer then. I think it doesn't help so much. Maybe I leave it at this. I think I make it a bit simpler. So the point that I want to make is if there is a negative eigenvalue in this thing, right, then you, in a diagonal basis, this would have a negative number here. This will not be changed by the positive factor here. If you have a negative number and another negative here, then it gives a positive number, and then you add it to 1, right? So basically, you get an eigenvalue which somewhere on this thing will be a bit bigger than 1. So you will get divergence. And this eigenvalue is actually in the direction where you would decrease from the saddle point. So roughly speaking, if you, let's say now here, I mean, let's say I have a saddle point, and for example, you could have what would be typically, I mean, could be a two-dimensional right? And sometimes x2 is the function. You have lines like this, increasing here, and here, decreasing here, right? So you are either, if you start unhappily, then it will converge to this point, and it would get stuck there, and it might stop there, and then say this is bad, right? But actually, if you are not exactly right, a little bit, right? Because then you have some deviation, you will actually diverge down. So actually, it's the same thing as, I mean, if you go, I don't know, if you roll a ball right down, and it's, I mean, it will usually not be stable on the saddle. It will roll down to the side. So saddle points are not stable under our normal optimization algorithm. So in that sense, it doesn't happen so often, even though, of course, you can't exclude, right? Does it answer your question? Great, thank you. And now, so last round, I mean, not the last round, but it's the last topic. So now, the reverse AD intuition and the forward AD, what's the gain of the dot quantities, and then the chain rule with vector. Okay. I think I will first do the one in the middle, because it's easiest to ask that. What is the so how do dot quantities save computation time? And the answer is they don't save computation time. It's very simple. Forward AD doesn't improve, let's say, on speed. Usually, let's say, I mean, there's some cases where it could actually maybe even improve speed a bit, but usually it doesn't. So it's just more accurate. So it's similar to finite differences, but more accurate. That's actually what it is. Finite difference means just better. So the forward mode is solid and good, right? But it's not exciting. Exciting is reverse AD because of this result. And I think if you are, did it answer your question?
Yes,
not yet fully. Yeah. Okay, so for algorithmic differentiation, there are two reasons why we use it. One is because we want to have an accurate derivative, and the second is because we want to have it also cheap. Yeah, so these are two things. Oh, that's also a kind. I mean, there's like, if you think of it, if you have a derivative, there are three things to it, right? It should be exact, it shouldn't be fast, and it should not consume too much memory, right? And yeah, maybe you could also say it should be easy to program, right? I mean, there are many other things, right? But let's say finite difference is easy to program. Yeah? Doesn't need too much memory, but it's not fast. Yeah? Forward AD is very accurate. Easy to program or not, I mean, you can argue about it, but it's not also, it's not fast. I mean, depending on your function. Yeah? Can be But the main point is it's accurate, and this is something that is not absolutely true for finite differences. You might perturb too much or too little, right? You never know how to perturb, actually. I don't know if you did this exercise, but I would really recommend that you try it. Differentiate e to the x. Right? What's the derivative of e to the x? F x. This F x. Very simple thing. So what is it? It's actually the derivative of e to the x, and then right? So you know what the derivative is. But now compute this thing with finite difference just for the fun of it. And if you compute it like this, e to the how do we call this perturbation? T. No, what s? Epsilon. Good. Epsilon minus e to the 0. Right? That's like what the finite difference would give you. And then here I have log of epsilon, and here I have an log of the absolute value of this thing. F minus e. Right? That's the error. So if you look for that, if your epsilon is too big, you have this function, right? So this is like e to the x, right? So if I this as my derivative approximation with epsilon, right? It's wrong. So I will have some large errors. If I make my epsilon smaller, at some point I will get back. And then comes the point where I'm really close, right? And then I subtract 10 to the minus 16, right? I mean, numbers, they get very close to each other. So you have one that you subtract, and you have 1.000000, right? And this is, so to say, a very noisy number. And you still divide it by something very small, you make it a big number. So what you get at some point is then this very noisy pattern. You take too small a perturbation, it's very wrong. So if you do finite differences and you want to get an accurate derivative, you need to usually aim for something. I think you're going from this region, so you aim for something right. So a bit too big, but not too small, but also not too big, right? So, but how do you find that? And that is so. What if you have there exists advanced finite difference routines which are very fast and efficient actually. Sometimes they use central differences, but what they usually do is like they try different step sizes and compare them, and so they sort of say estimate more or less such a function and then make a decision. So then it gets much more expensive because you need to not have only one direction but 2 or 3 in each. So in that sense, if you want to get it right, then it's difficult, mathematically. And AD always does it right. It gives you the right number, right? This machine precision. But will always give you like this. I mean, there is no epsilon, but okay. So in that sense, forward AD without quantity advantage. I think I want to go with this chain rule and then go for this intuition for evaluations. Who asked the chain rule question? Was it you? Right? I use a pretty exaggerated notation in this manuscript on page 676. And this notation, actually, I say it in the footnote, it was suggested to me by a postdoc in my team, Carlos Savagnan. And I found it very elegant, and that's why I included it. But it's also a bit overkill, you could say, and it's unusual. Usually people don't present it. But I chose to present it, and now I have to explain it again. Right? So the idea is to basically say whatever you do with the program, you could say every line of the program adds a new variable to all. I mean, you create a vector. We call it x, xm. So x tilde m, right, is the vector that contains all quantities that have been concluded until now. Or maybe I should call it K. So this is like the thing that we define here. So basically all numbers that we had already computed until now, I store them in one measure. And now the thing is, every single operation, even though in reality it's just a multiplication of two numbers, I lift it into a very high dimensional space where I said, okay, it means that this the vector of all computed numbers gets now prolonged by one extra component, which is at n plus k plus 1, right? So this extra component gets added in each. I mean, that's what one elementary operation is. Right? It makes from this vector the vector x to the k plus 1 by doing something that, I mean, adding the last element, copying all the others. It's a very overkill way of representing what one elementary operation does, right? And in reality, of course, it doesn't need to copy these things, it just keeps them in mind. But that's the conceptual way. So, and I call this maps from one to the next. I call this this is like x plus 1 is equal to some I tilde of a x tilde k. Right? So I have a map that makes this thing. And this map is actually it's very simple. It just copies all things from x k tilde, which has all components apart from the last one, and then here it does the elementary operation, which in this case we call I k and without tilde of, and then formally it is of all the other elements, but in reality it's only 1 or 2, and this 1 and 2 is actually important for the factor 4. Yeah. I will come back to that, right? So basically, what you get then is that this whole metric, this is like an elementary operation. That's the real one. Okay, and then in my language now, forward AD is just let's say a chain rule applied to chain of all these maps, right? So if you think of all operations at the end of the program, they will be m, right? And that is the map that we get from phi. This phi tilde, the nth operation is the last, I think, right? And that you let act on the result of the previous operation, and then until the first operation, I think we call it 1, right? Oh, I started the index 0, so here's n minus 1, and here's 2, and then I start on 0, right? And that is x tilde 0, but x tilde 0 is actually the values. And then, so basically a concatenation, a call function of the function of the function. That's basically what I do, right? So it's a chain, you know. And the point is, this is like my interpretation of, I mean, I have these starting numbers, x0, these numbers, and at the very end, I have the starting values still, you know, 0 plus and all the other components. So x n plus m is the last one. So I have generated a lot of numbers now, and then at the very end I select one number out of them, and usually I select the last one, and that's what my selection matrix C does. Right? So I would say then the overall function, what do we call the overall function f? And this thing is equal to x, right? So then f of x is equal to C, the selection matrix times all this stuff, right? All these concatenation. So now I have a very funny way to represent my function, but that allows me to just write down the derivative, and then I write it down, and I will say, hey, so I have df by dx, what is it? All the Jacobians of all these things come multiplied with each other. That's what the chain rule is. And now I can work with matrix-based chain rule, right? So it's, are you familiar with the matrix form of chain rules? Maybe I give it to you. That's maybe the thing here. But it's relatively simple, like f of g of x. Right? And if I differentiate that whole thing, then it is actually what is it? The outer derivative, right? D, and I write the partial ones now, df by d y, maybe I call this inter, I mean, somehow it's not x actually, it's the input of the f, right? And I value the g of x, and then I multiply it with g by dx. And then I get the x, right? So that's the chain rule. This is a Jacobian matrix, and this is and so of course these matrices are always evaluated at the point this function was evaluated f is evaluated g of x. So that's what we have now in this long notation in formula 10.4. 10.4. That's basically the derivative of that function. And after I've established this thing, right? Did we define these things, the Jacobians? Yeah, I think this was maybe a bit fast, right? So maybe let me define J's tilde I Jacob, right? This little thing here. Yes, so 77 is defined, but it's not so nicely defined. So let me try to J tilde I, right? But in reality, it's a function of the argument that we are. Basically a function of yeah, the vector with the same index, right? So x tilde I. And that is then a matrix which has every value. And that here is just the partial derivatives of the elementary function. You could say this is actually d I d I d x tilde I. And x tilde I is this whole vector, but because it's an elementary operation, it values at the current number. And so this will contain one or two elements. So, for example, if your elementary operation was x7 times x9, right? You had that. Then, this would be like how. Then the derivative of that will be, it will be a lot of zeros until I'm 7. The 7th entry, so this is like 1, and then this 7. Will be x9 because x9 is the partial derivative of that with respect to 7, right? And there will be 0 on the 8th entry, and then here will be an x. And then here will be 0, right? So it will have only 2 entries. These are the 2 partial derivatives of that function with respect to the corresponding number. Okay, if there was only cosine of something, then there would be only sine of the same. So in that sense, there is nearly a lot of zeros, and that's actually the core of this factor of 2, right? So now we show in this forward mode that you can just basically compute it with a bounded cost by roughly speaking copying this dot quantities. I think the forward mode is a bit straightforward, right? And then in the reverse mode, we basically go through this Jacobian product the reverse way. That's why I introduced all this overhead, because I think the reverse mode is better to understand. So if you look at equation 10.8, that's so to say what we do in the reverse mode. So we go from left to right. Okay, and then we call these quantities bar quantities, and then we call these AD. And now shifting things in a reverse AD. If you look at algorithm 6, and I will not write it down now, please look at algorithm 6. Yes. There you will actually do this reverse thing. Above the algorithm, you see this matrix transpose this one, right? And there are only 2 entries which are non-zero in the stars. These 2 entries, they might be, so they are the only things where you really have to do something. And that means that in every reverse step, for every elementary operation that you had, right, you might have 2 elementary operations for the reverse field. And these 2 operations could, they will, so to say, take the old value. They might need to one multiplication, one addition. So that's where the factor, but this factor 3 to 4, I mean, depends a bit on how your things are implemented and so on. But it's because you have two operations, it's so to say something in this order. If you would allow elementary operations of factor, it's too long actually, then you wouldn't call them elementary anymore. If there would be 3 elements, I could decompose them, right? So, all our algebra is based on like doing things together. Yeah.
But like there it shows that the number of elements that you think are costly the computation of that group, right?
Yeah.
Because in my formula will increase. Right? If I have 2.
I mean, if you look at algorithm 6, right?
Yeah.
So
before like the one part is slow.
yes, so it's very good actually. If you look at algorithm 6, how I wrote it down, then it's like a two-loop algorithm, right? That sounds like a complete overkill, and it is. And that's why I have this note below which says each inner loop will only update 1 or 2 partners, because all the other things are just adding zeros, right? You should actually not go through them, but I wanted to avoid this index notation. I mean, in reality, of course, you know that only x7 and x9 enter, and you know that there's no entry here. There can be no other entry anywhere else, and you never visit that part of the loop. So the loop is actually written relatively different. That's what becomes clear with the examples, I think, right? So the inner loop is, you could say that's confusing, right? Because I keep all these things where you basically, you have this matrix multiplication control of that, right? And then I have a 0 here, and then maybe something here, and zeros, and maybe something here, right? All the zeros, right? Nothing happens. You just copy this element. And if I copy an element, I don't copy it, I just leave it where it is. That's where otherwise it would be theoretically grown with a number of new elements. Thank you for that question. I think the remark at the end of algorithm 6 is, so to say, the answer. So the inner loop is not really executed like it's written down there. It's really yes. So this inner loop will cost, let's say, there will be 1 or 2 evaluations in the inner loop, and they might be maximum 2 times as expensive as one forward.
Can we pinpoint where that value is?
Which one?
Like let's say where the x9 is left apart.
Yes.
Can we pinpoint like in an array?
Yeah. I mean, that's what all these computer algorithms do. What such a tool will do, it will say I have 3 numbers. 1, 2, x3, right? These 2 will be multiplied to x4, which is in the number. That would be the product of 2 times x3, right? Which is 100. Then I take these 2 numbers and I add them. So then I say x5 is equal to x4 plus x1, right? And so this way you generate something that is called a directed acyclic graph, right? So directed because here in order of the computation. This could be, of course, already the object, for example, for a very simple example. And so you actually, for every vertex in your graph, you know what are the parents, right? And so there's always a direction, and so you could just these graph-based algorithms, you basically forward, you go forward, and backward, you go. Yeah. So these species are basically stored inside of these algorithms. Yes, thank you for this question. Yes, it's not. Is it? Answered all questions, right? Exactly. So then we are ready for follow-up questions. Yes.
It's the by the regulations.
Yes.
But before that, this because we compose the function.
Exactly. Like in some sense, Kazadi and I mean, Kazadi is called a computer algebra system. In the sense that it doesn't take a program code inside, but it has its own language. So you have to find things the Kazadi way of doing that. so function, C function, this process. But then internally, what it does is while you define the function the Casali way, MATLAB, for example, once you have a Casali quantity, something like an Sx or something, when you put that into a MATLAB function and it evaluates all these things, then so the MATLAB commands are, so to say, interpreted as like memory. I mean, basically, when you write, you have something like E is some other Fx value, so you compare them with this thing, and then you say C equals A times B. The multiplication is, so to say, overloaded, right? So basically what this does is it calls Casali and it says, hey, you have two quantities that should be symbolically multiplied. Please create a structure. And then C is a symbolic variable after that. And so, so basically, one thing was saved in the graph, let's say, and then C was made a symbolic variable, and then when you go on, whatever you do with the C will also make a label that when you go through this line, Casali will be. So it's something I find pretty elegant because you can write a MATLAB function, you can call it, right? You do it sometimes, you call a MATLAB function. You can call it from MATLAB, but when you call it with double numbers, right? But once you call it with Casali numbers, which are not numbers, but just symbolic things, right? At that moment, because MATLAB is agnostic about types of quantity, you can basically, so to say, misuse all this. That's a very beautiful feature of MATLAB-based Casali. I think it's an.
Behind the graph.
Yes, behind it has this tape, as it's called. So it's like a long data structure. And maybe I should also say when you evaluate Casali function, you can also just evaluate it. Right? The funny thing is you evaluate it as a MATLAB function. If you run it on MATLAB, it basically becomes saved inside the Casali memory. And when you call it, it's using, let's say, the compiled Casali. I mean, it's the multiplication is just a multiplication. It's not the MATLAB multiplication. I mean, you take two numbers in MATLAB and you multiply them. MATLAB will do thousands of other things before it multiplies. Right? It will check that the dimensions are correct, and so that it can give you all these very elaborate error. So it's useful, but it's not fast, right? C code is very fast, and Casali is a variable function that you store inside Casali as a Casali, but afterwards you can call it with nearly compiled speed without the need to compile it. Yeah. And of course, there's also one feature that you can do. You can like this function, you can export it, and then you can export it as a C function. That's in itself not very interesting because you could have written the function yourself. What is interesting that you can generate a derivative, which is another function, so it will also be in the graph. The derivative is nothing else than the original function, it's just another graph, right? And so in this graph, you can also export as it. Then you have a C code which gives you the. You can also take the graph and differentiate it again. Right? Then you get the second derivative. So it's recursively. That's for all ADTs, right? But I just want to give you the flavor. It's not. I mean, it's somewhere in the background. There is some really computer algebra system taking care of all the quantities in memory. So the code that you write is only your user interface, and then it's somehow deep inside Casali what happens afterwards. Okay. So all questions around maybe some. Yeah, we have time for a second round of questions. Maybe I should just say we are so little small group of people that I think I want to learn names. I think maybe you could learn them yourself from each other. That's okay for you. Would you be open to them? Yeah. So what I would then do is I open the window, right, and we do a mini break, 5 minutes or something, and we would present our names, and then the questions afterwards. Would we still have some questions or not? Are there questions from online or real world? Yes, there are some questions. Okay,
Yeah, I have.
Yes, 2 more questions will be afterwards, right? Then we do,
Great.
I think we do a 10-minute break and then we still do, let's say, 10 minutes of questions. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Because we have
Thank
2
you.
more questions. Okay. Yeah. And Hannes, I think because you're online and the others, I think you can relax during the next 10 minutes. It's better.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good. So open the window and I think we can move forward. Huh? Yeah. Very cold, right? We should close. That means that that's the sign, right? The sign that the air exchange is very how would you have knowledge from maybe sorry?
We just
Okay. Johannes,
use for
Actually not.
yeah, everything now.
Everything.
I know these 30 ago. I really have to. I'm so sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm very bad. We have
what we used to.
Yeah, I guess I think also. Yeah. Last winter I had anxiety. Yeah, something I don't see. You know, yes. Something, something with my sister and saying, it's all about like that. See most it's around sensors, you know, too much. It's not like so you're going to be a teacher? What's the other subject? I started with math. Yeah. Yeah. You what? And then you go to, I mean, like, is it possible to go to high school and teach, let's say, I'm really. And you should secondary school. For different options in the and that's, I mean, I was there for my history teaching. The teachers for the grammar school, You mean the journalistic and no, it doesn't mean subject, it's about students to educate. And it's a division. They come from the students that come up to they have one. I guess that's what I say. I said that you have 3 months. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we start yeah. Okay, we are back. Yeah, great. Thank you, Hannes, for waiting, for the patience. Okay, so we had 2 more questions.
I think at least two, right? One was from Hannes and one was from Rashmi, right? So Hannes, maybe you can start because you waited.
Thank you. I've got a question about the thumb rule of a good perturbation for finite differences. Is that the square root of the machine position is a good thumb rule to choose, but why is this a good sub?
Yeah, okay. So I think we have a question in one sheet. What's the rule of thumb for a good perturbation step size, right? And maybe let me try to derive it, right? It's for first order finite difference or second? What do you?
First order.
Okay. So what do we want? I mean, we have basically a function, let's say a scalar function of x to make it simple, right? So how can we derive? And it's a bit improvising, right? So you have to f of x plus epsilon minus f of x divided by epsilon, and that's the estimate of this thing, which depends on x and x, right? And so what you want is that to look at the error. The error is like difference of this thing, right? And the whole thing, this is the and for now, I can look at Taylor series, and I also need to realize that this is also a numerical approximation, right? So it has errors itself. Yeah? And so I have basically this will be the true function of value x plus epsilon plus an error, right? This error I call maybe E1, right? It's in the size of the machine precision, and I subtract from the true value of this minus the error of the second. That is also machine precision, and then I divide that out by 2. So this error is like the difference between the numerical evaluation and the true number, right? I leave out the argument, but it depends, of course, on x and on epsilon. Okay, and then I can this is 0 on this side, so this is actually what is it? Actually, this thing I can use Taylor series for. It's f of x plus df, I mean basically f prime at x times epsilon, right? That's this first order thing. And then I have some term which is of the I call it maybe some constant times I call it O of epsilon, right? So it's like an error term. Minus f minus E2, and then I divide 2 by epsilon. Okay, so that's what I have now. And now comes the interesting part. I have this and this same, right? And this one I would approximate with something that's proportional to E. It's actually the second derivative, something like this. So I call it like this, and it would be something like constant L, which is so to say the second derivative, right? And epsilon squared plus E1 minus E2. And then I divide that by. So now I have my, that is, no, that's not right. This is all the things plus f prime of x. Right? So that's a true thing that I get. And so now there's a bit of an error because the division is also possibly wrong, right? But this division is mostly shift of digits. So I think this error is in certain part, the one where I divide by epsilon, right? I divide by 10 to the minus 10, then it's just multiplying by 10 to the 10, which is meaning shifting then. So in floating point arithmetic, that's not such a bad thing. Okay, so now what is it? It's actually the true value, right? That's the good thing. Plus one term is the some Lipschitz constant, I call it, like this thing is roughly if you have your function, right? It's the curvature, right? It's L is more or less like the second derivative of x, right? Something like the second derivative. Plus something here I have 2 times something like x divided by epsilon, right? Sorry, here I have also divided by epsilon, right? This is like the error. And so now think of this error, something like E of epsilon, let's say, right? Say the size of that. So E of epsilon is now this remaining term, something that is L times epsilon plus, okay, this is a factor of 2, but I don't care, right? So it's on caps, combined caps. Yeah. And maybe I leave the factor 2, but I mean, this is also not known, right? So I just assume these things are all in the order of 1. That's now the interesting thing, right? Okay, I don't want to confuse it. So I leave a 2 here, just for the moment. Maybe I should then, maybe I would also put a 1 over 2 here, because it's really the Taylor series over the second derivative. And so then I would do okay, it's maybe, I mean, these factors don't care so much, but this is basically, what is this function? You have epsilon here, and e to the epsilon. It's a function which goes to infinity when epsilon goes small, and it grows linearly when epsilon goes. So it has a minimum somewhere. This minimum I can compute. E equals to epsilon. What is it? It's actually L divided by 2, and then plus. No, minus, right? 2 x. X is not a number, this is not very nicely written, but I mean abstract machine precision. Divided by epsilon squared, right? That's it, and that should be 0. And that means that epsilon squared, right? I mean, the 3 order these things are this is equal to 2. Divided by L divided by 4 times x. And so you will just say that x is equal to 2 times the square root of x divided by L. Well, that would be, let's say, if you accurately know machine precision, right? And actually, this factor 2 might not be right, because you have 2 numbers and it doesn't give the double error. It's actually the square root of 2, I think, if you think of the size. But you see that you get, if you assume that the second derivative is in the order of 1, right? And the factor of 2 doesn't make such a big difference. If you have 10 to the minus 16, then it's 10 to the minus 8, what you should perturb, right? That's the derivation. And one thing that's really interesting to know about this derivation is if you have numerically very inaccurate functions. Yeah? For example, you have a simulator, like you call an ODE solver in Fluent or whatever, right? It gives you a function evaluation, and then you want to perturb it, and then you should carefully think what's the accuracy of this function evaluation, because it's not machine precision usually, but it's much worse. Like a good integrator with step size controllers maybe 10 to the minus 6, right? And then you should perturb by 10 to the minus 3, which is much more. Yeah? And in order to avoid that, you're in this noisy region. Okay, so that's like the rule of thumb. And this rule of thumb changes if you do central differences. If I perturb positive and negative, then I perturb a bit more actually. And I think it's something like the 2, what is it? Epsilon to the 2/3 or something. It's a bit different, but it could also be right, but I don't. I mean, just for finite forward differences exist.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for the question. Now, Rashmi, another question.
We had this diagram that the one line belongs to gamma 1 and
Which side?
9.
So globalization.
Yes.
Which line? Which formula? Okay, but it's corresponding to which?
Section 9.
Okay. Yes, alternative lines are based on the Wolf condition. Okay, yes, and we have 9.9 and 9.10. These are the Wolf conditions. Yeah.
So we have 2 lines corresponding to the 2 conditions.
Yes.
And we consider the slope of line gamma 2 and the slope of our movements should be greater than the gamma 2. graph.
Yes.
So in graph, we get a sets of RMU points that satisfy these two conditions, right? So how do we select one particular TP from the set of RMU?
I didn't get the last, just acoustically. So
We have multiple RMU points that
yes.
satisfy.
If you have more than 1 point, then you just take one. You actually you take the first one which satisfies both conditions.
Okay.
Yes, that's the idea. When you have found one, then you take it. And how do people search for them? I don't exactly know, but I mean the backtracking you could do for Amir, right? And then you could just check if that satisfies the other Wolfe condition. If it doesn't, you might actually increase it already a bit, because at some point I think if you maybe I try. I mean I just want it's like a one possible algorithm, but right. But if you think of it, you have this gamma 1 and the gamma 2, and you think of the function. Way to look at it, right? So you have this gamma 1 multiple from here to there, right? Gamma 1. So it changes related to this derivative, right? And then the gamma 2 is also is bigger than gamma 1, right? So there is another line that's, let's say here, gamma 2, right? Still below 1, but above gamma 1. If gamma would be 0, then it would be this horizontal, but this is like this. So now I look for a point which has this slope or bigger, right? And I know my original thing has a slope that's going down, right? So at some point, if it doesn't go really to infinity down, which I have to assume, if there's something like it's not going to infinity, at some point it must go upwards, right? And that means at some point I will have a bigger curve, a bit bigger slope. So from here on, after this point, I will have the second satisfied, right? From here on. And actually, the first one is satisfied for any things that we don't get. The first one is anyway satisfied already for this point, right? So that's how it was designed. Like, so for very short points, the first one will be always satisfied. But now the second condition is now, I mean, what we sometimes do with backtracking, that step is not too small. We can also achieve with a second Wolfe condition, so that we need to at least get a little bit of a change in the curvature. So there is always at least one interval that satisfies this, and one way to yeah, and once you have found one, actually, sorry, this is bigger, and I'm not so sure, maybe slide here at some point. Accelerate a little, so that something like this, right? And at some point, this, yeah, so these points will be excluded, right? I cannot, they are forbidden, right? For the bottom, in that sense, I mean, if you're unlucky and you find one of them, then you need to either increase or decrease. I don't know exactly how these algorithms are looking for them, but that they exist is pretty clear from the picture. I think one can prove that such points exist. I mean, you could start with a step size of 1. If your first condition isn't satisfied, you would backtrack because at some point it will be satisfied. No. If you have backtracked enough, right, then you check that your second condition is satisfied, and if it's not, then you know you need to just increase, because at some point, if increase more and more, at some point it needs to go, and the slope should also go. Something.
So we can take anything that belongs to
yes, so any point that's there is fine. And the good thing is the second condition makes sure that the step size is never going to be 0. So they have this both conditions together, ensure that you don't get stopped, so to say. Amir alone makes that you don't oscillate, right? The Amir condition is the first Wolfe condition, it's the same, right? And then the second Wolfe condition is making sure that your step size doesn't get too small. And the second Wolfe condition is even very useful for BFGS updates. Actually, that's very useful because it also ensures that you get always positive curvature into your secant update. So the BFGS is very often used with these Wolfe conditions. I think I'm somehow getting close to the end. Are there more questions?
So will it set not for every education in like
Yes, I mean, this is not, you never do actually, right? It's also just in my fantasy. Yes, yes, yes. And the only thing that my choice of descent direction, I mean, what I need to ensure is that this direction is going down, right? That this derivative at this point must be down, otherwise my whole line search would not work. Right? So we need to have a descent direction, but once you have a descent direction, this picture is somehow different every time, depends on the point and the direction. And it will always go down, and under some circumstances it will not go down. It's wrong. Okay. Then I would suggest we stop here maybe. Now there's still one doubt. Yeah.
I think that just so I picture so the idea also find the meaning.
No. The aim of Wolfe conditions, right, or of any of these globalization areas, is to find a point which is a bit lower than the starting point, right? So this is the starting point. Actually, this point, for example, is I'm sure to be lower, right? Lower by this margin, right? At least gamma, a bit more, right? So, but it's at least deeper by this margin, right? Okay. But it's also not shrinking to zero because this margin could also be satisfied time factor. Yeah, and so you would also want it to be big enough so that the algorithm can't get stored. And then only if you have these two conditions, then you can actually prove, and that's important in practice, that your algorithm doesn't get stuck by making too short steps, right? Or doesn't get too big and oscillates away, right? So basically, the main purpose, I would say, of globalization is to make your steps smaller, usually, right? But not too small. And in backtracking, this not too small is true by taking the first point that is satisfying the condition, the first one, not the second, but the first one that satisfies a view you should take, and then you have a guarantee. We use that in our proof, right? And in Wolfe is the second condition which makes sure that it's not too small. So you want to have a sufficiently small step, but not too small. And only these two things can sufficiently small ensures that you get descent in every direction. And the other ensures that you can't get stalled and you can't get stuck at a point where the gradient is not zero. Right? So your algorithm will not stop somewhere on the slope. Right? It will only stop when you're in. Not at all. No, exactly. I think we had that question last time, but globalization doesn't mean global. Yeah. That's a very different concept with the same name. Yeah, that's confusing. Thank you. It's always good to recall. Okay. I would say goodbye to everyone, to us and to you. Goodbye. Goodbye. Yeah. Thank you.
See you. Bye.